Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video we'll be looking at selective breeding. So what explains the variety and number of breeds of dogs that you can see here? Huge number of different breeds of dogs that are available today, all originally came from one ancestral species or group of wolves. But how? Well, the answer to that question is through selective breeding. Selective breeding occurs when a breeder or a farmer selects individuals that have the desirable characteristics, and he allows those individuals with those desirable characteristics to breed and pass on the genes that control those characteristics to the next generation. And through that process, we've been able to change the appearance and characteristics of a number of different species. For example, the pit bull dog here from the 1800s compared to a modern day pit bull, which has a much more sloping skull shape. The British bulldog, which now has many more folds of skin, and the basset hound, whose ear length has massively increased. But it's not just dogs or pets that we can do this with. We also do this with within the farming and agricultural industries. For example, an original wild cow has now been turned into the beef cow, which has much greater muscle mass and produces a huge amount of beef for human consumption. It also happens in plants where we could take wild wheat, and wild wheat has been selectively bred to increase the amount of seeds that it produces, again for human consumption, but it's also been selectively bred in a different manner to produce corn or maize, which again has a great number of seeds and has allowed the amount of food that we consume on this planet to be able to increase, so we can sustain a much larger human population. The steps in selective breeding are very similar to the steps in natural selection. Remember, in natural selection, it's all about being adapted to your environment, and if you happen to have an advantage that it gives you a better adaptation, you're more likely to survive and breed and pass on the alleles for that natural advantage. Well, in selective breeding, we again have to begin with the variation in the population. And this is where it changes, because a farmer or a breeder will then intervene, and he will select individuals with those characteristics that he says are desirable, and he will then allow those individuals to breed. And the other individuals, if you don't have the desirable characteristic, you do not get to breed. But if you have the desirable characteristic, then you can breed and you can pass on those alleles for that desirable characteristic to the next generation. The desirable characteristics within the next generation therefore become more common, and we may even create new breeds. Let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail. You might be a farmer working with cows, and you want your cows to have a good temperament. That means they're not aggressive, they're easy to control, easy to work with. But you also want your cows to be able to produce a good milk yield. Well, you may take two of your cows, one which produces a good milk yield and a bull which has a good temperament and is easy to work with, and that you may allow them to breed. Now, the possible offspring is what you're looking for. You don't really want the cow that's got an average milk yield but a good temperament. You don't really want an average milk yield and an average temperament. That cow wouldn't be very useful for you. A cow with a good milk yield is what you're hoping to get, but you really want a good milk yield linked in with a good temperament. And if you're able to produce this individual through the sexual reproduction of the parents, then you would allow that individual to breed again and again and again, hoping that in the next generation and the generation after and so on, that all your cows would eventually have good or better milk yields and have a very good temperament. So there's a lot of advantages to selective breeding. Selective breeding can be used to produce a range of different features and characteristics. For example, you can use selective breeding to produce disease-resistant crops in food or garden plants. You can use selective breeding to produce animals that produce more meat or more milk. And as I said before, that's very important when you factor in that our human population is massively increasing and we will need more meat, more milk and more food. You may well produce domestic animals such as dogs or farm animals with a more gentle nature. And if we look at plants, then you may be able to produce large or unusually bright coloured or heavily scented flowers, which will be more popular with consumers who wish to buy them. Selective breeding is used to produce new, useful organisms or new, enjoyable organisms. But selective breeding does have its disadvantages. Selective breeding reduces the number of alleles or genes in a population because only individuals with the chosen alleles are allowed to breed. This reduces variation between individuals and the variety of alleles for a given characteristic. And when the environment changes, for example due to climate change or a new disease, this can mean that none of the population have the alleles to cope with the new environment, so our population may die out or go extinct. A good example of this is banana plants. Banana plants are at risk of a new fungal disease due to a lack of genetic variation brought about by selective breeding. None of the banana plants are resistant to the new pathogen, and therefore the new pathogen, when it will destroy and kill one banana plant, it has a chance of destroying and killing all the banana plants. In the banana growing industry around the world, this new fungal disease is a major concern. But it's not the first time this has happened. Approximately 100 years ago, this had happened before, and the main strain of bananas that people were eating 100 years ago was destroyed by a fungal disease and no longer exists. And the new strain of bananas that we all currently eat is at risk of the same issue. Another disadvantage of selective breeding is inbreeding. Now, inbreeding occurs when animals are bred with close relatives. This results in very little variation within the population. So it's more likely to pass on inherited recessive disorders. So you may receive two recessive alleles from your parents because they are closely related, and therefore you're more likely to be having a population with a high percentage of recessive genetic diseases. For example, boxer dogs are more at high risk of having a disease called epilepsy. King Charles Spaniel dogs actually have been bred so that their skulls are too small for their brains, which of course causes a lot of pain. And pugs have now been bred to have noses that are so small that they actually struggle to breathe. There are approximately 10,000 pugs in the UK, but they have the same genetic variation as just 50 normal mongrel dogs. I hope you've enjoyed this video. As always, if you have, please like and subscribe and comment below. Let me know what you've learnt. Thank you very much for watching.